Good morning, everyone. It is Tuesday, January 12th, and I am recording for Health Science 1. So I'm going to share my screen with you guys, and we will jump right into continuing on with the body systems unit that we're currently on. So you see my Zoom screen, and here we are where I just clicked under modules and then it clicked under Tuesday. So I'm going to go ahead and activate these for you guys so you can see them. So you see yesterday we did Organization of the Human Body 1. I posted a fun Zoom and then you had your notes. So today, similar situation, although you are not going to have notes due for this section, you will have a quiz tomorrow that is going to cover what we go over today, tomorrow, and from Monday. Okay, so just keep that in the back of your mind. Quiz tomorrow, but we are going to review the Map of the Human Body 2 today. So I'm going to click on this link that you see here, and we're going to go through this information and get you a little bit more familiar with some of these terms, what they mean, and why we use them in the medical field. So the map of the human body, first and foremost, we're going to always refer to our patients in anatomical position. Anatomical position is how you refer to left, right, anterior, posterior, lateral, all of those things, superior, inferior. We're going to talk about those terms later, so don't get too stressed out. The anatomical position is the position that you see the person here on the right side of your screen. The patient is standing tall with their face forward. Their feet are parallel, shoulder width apart. Their arms are hanging to the side and their palms must face forward. So a lot of the times students who are learning anatomical position get the most confused by the palms facing forward because that seems a little bit strange for people, but we do palms facing forward so that your thumbs are pointing towards the sky, because when we talk about how the body moves and how we describe certain parts of the body, that is just the most acceptable position to be able to explain things. Moving forward, we're also going to talk about other positions. So you see that supine is laying on your back face up. So supine is laying face up. And then the opposite of that would be prone, lying on your stomach. The only way I found over the years to help people remember this is if you play Call of Duty or some of those different military games, it'll talk about being in the prone position when you're looking for an opponent or something like that. And so that's how a lot of my guys and girls have been able to remember that prone position. But prone is laying on your stomach downward, and supine is laying on your back face up. Okay. You have Trendelenburg, which I just usually describe to people as toes over nose. Basically, it means that you're lying with your head of bed. HOB is that abbreviation for that, is lower than your feet or your nose. Excuse me, your toes are over your nose, which means they're higher. Trendelenburg position would be used for someone who is having blood pressure issues and we need to really quickly get that blood back to the brain. I use it when I'm positioning patients by myself because gravity is your best friend. So I can usually pull someone up in the bed from Trendelenburg position a little bit more easily. You can use this position for certain types of strokes and things like that to keep blood pressure normal. And then it can also be used for different procedures and things like that. Running back one slide really quickly for supine and prone. Obviously, there are different reasons why you would be in these positions. Supine is a general position where they can access any of the front parts of the body. If we needed to look at your stomach, the tops of your feet, your hips, your ribs, your face, anything like that. Prone would be the opposites of any of the back portion of the body or the posterior portion of the body. So your bottom, the backs of your legs, the soles of your feet, the back of your neck and head, and of course your back. Fowler's position is sitting up, basically. So Fowler's position is sitting in bed with the head of bed elevated 45 to 60 degrees. Fowler's position, again, is like a semi-sitting position in the bed, okay? This is not something you would want for someone who is eating because they are much too reclined, okay? You would want someone in a high Fowler's position or the head of the bed sitting up even further to be safe for eating. So there's a little tag there to help you remember. So now we're moving on into body planes, okay? There's not a really fun way to describe these to you. You're just going to have to take some time and memorize these. And we do like to use the colors to help you remember as well. It isn't hard. A lot of the times people who like math also seem to like these as well. But transverse plane is your horizontal plane, which means it cuts the body into top and bottom halves, okay? So it's almost like a cross section. If we were to slice you right in half at your belly button, then we could see the cross section of the top and the bottom. So again, top and bottom halves is transverse. So try to do T, T, transverse, top and bottom. Then you have your median plane or your mid-sagittal plane. That's going to be the blue one that you see here. Mid-sagittal always makes me think of middle. So we're really slicing you right down the middle. So we're slicing you into left and right halves, okay? So you'll see it written as median, mid-sagittal, or sagittal plane, okay? So it's when we're slicing the body right down the middle as if we were going from your belly button, top and bottom, all the way down, okay? So don't get confused by that. I think this is going to be your best study method here. This diagram that I'm pointing to on slide 6, okay? So transverse, top and bottom, sagittal, left and right, and then your frontal plane, which is last, is the front and the back of the body, okay? That can also sometimes be referred to as the coronal plane, but in this class, we typically like to use frontal. Then you have some directional terms here listed on slide 9, okay? So your directional terms are as follows. You have superior and inferior. One thing I want you guys to notice before we dive into these too much is that typically these two are opposites of one another. So superior and inferior are opposites of one another. Medial and lateral are opposites. Anterior, posterior, proximal, distal, external, and internal. So superior and inferior, if you think of who your superior is, it's your boss. It's the person who's at the top. Okay, so your superior, if you're talking about something like that, is the top. So it's located towards the top of the body. So the nose is superior to the mouth because the nose is more on top than the mouth. Inferior would be located towards the bottom of the body. So your ankles are inferior to your knees. Your ankles are more towards the bottom of the body than your knees. Okay. Medial is towards the midline of the body. So my belly button is medial in comparison to my thumb. Okay. My belly button is medial in comparison to my thumb, just located more towards the center of the body. Lateral could be the opposite. My thumbs are more lateral than my belly button because lateral is locating towards the side of the body or away. Anterior talks about the front of the body and posterior talks about the back of the body. So on the anterior portion of my body, I'll find my belly button. On the posterior portion of my body, I'll find my buttocks. Okay, so try to remember what's on the anterior and posterior parts of your body, and that may help you with those directional terms. Proximal and distal are usually the ones that confuse everyone the most, okay? So when I hear proximal, I think about proximity. Okay, so proximity is like where something is. So proximal is near a point of reference on the body and distal is away from a point of reference on the body. So when we use these terms, we traditionally refer to as the skeleton, or like when we get to the skeletal system, we're going to talk about the axial skeleton, which is your head, neck, and spine. That's typically what we're referring to when we talk about proximal and distal. But if I gave you an example like, which of the following is most proximal to the shoulder? And I say your elbow or your fingers. Well, proximal means the nearest to the point of reference. So if I said, which of the following is most proximal to your shoulder, and I said elbow and fingers, then you should choose elbow. You got it, because your elbow is closer to that point of reference, which was your shoulder. And in the opposite of that, which is the most distal from your shoulder, and I said elbow and fingers, you would choose fingers because that's the most distance away. Then we have external and internal. So I refer back to anyone who has had health team relations before. Remember, external sounds like exit, so it's on the outside of the body, and internal sounds like enter, which is on the inside of the body. A few more is superficial and deep, and then central and peripheral. So superficial and deep are opposites of one another. Superficial is referring to more of the body's surface, like you have a superficial burn versus a deep burn, or you have a superficial skin laceration, like you cut your skin open, but it's more superficial, which means it didn't damage any of those deep tissues, where deep would obviously mean towards the body's interior, okay? Then you have central and peripheral. So central sounds just like center, and peripheral sounds like your peripheral, which is your peripheral vision, what you see on the sides, or the things that are on the outer portion of your vision, okay? So I like to remember those in sets, guys. So I like to memorize A and B together, C and D together, E and F, G and H, I and J, K and L, and M and N, because they're opposites of one another. Learn them in pairs. I promise it'll help. For further review or assistance, you have the next few slides, okay? So it's going to talk about superior versus inferior. There's a great slide here that talks about the differences in proximal and distal, right and left, so your lateral versus your midline and things like that. If that helps you and you're a visual learner, it's a great visual for you. Medial and lateral is next, and it gives you lots of examples here. Posterior and anterior. Then your proximal and distal. And again, usually if people are going to have confusion over something like this, it's going to be proximal and distal. So spend a little bit more time here on this slide. External versus internal. So what you see on this slide is that external model here who has all his skin and everything. And then the internal model has no skin. He has no adipose tissue. We're looking straight at muscles and organs, okay? Superficial versus deep. So you'll see a couple of real life pictures here about superficial versus deep lacerations and skin. Central versus peripheral. So we're talking about the center of the body versus the peripheral, which is the not center of the body. So like your arms, your legs. Next, we're moving on to body cavities. And I know it seems like we have a lot here, guys, but I'm going to leave it up to you to take your notes and make sure you have this information readily available to you in a neat and organized fashion, just like we've been practicing with notes, okay? So dorsal cavity refers to the back of the body. So think about the dorsal fin on a dolphin or a fish. It's on the back. Cranial cavity is where your brain sits. Your spinal cavity is your spinal cord. So those are pretty straightforward. Your ventral cavities, that's a word you probably haven't heard before, but ventral means the front of the body. So in your ventral cavities, you may find your heart, you will find parts of your stomach, okay? And then we have your thoracic cavity, which is your chest. Thorax meaning chest, thoracic cavity, chest cavity. Pericardial cavity, which is a special place for the heart. So we know peri means around. Cardi means heart, so the pericardial cavity is just a special place that lies the heart. So you have all of your cavities listed here, your cranial cavity, your vertebral cavity, or your spinal cavity, where you have your spinal column. You have your ventral body cavity, which has all this fun stuff in it. Then you have your abdominopelvic cavity, which just has the parts that are in your abdomen and pelvis. So remember yesterday when we talked about those different body systems, it may ask you which body system is found in the abdominopelvic cavity, and you would choose digestive because that's where you find your colon and things like that. All right, so the abdominopelvic cavity, just like what we just talked about, is located below the diaphragm. The diaphragm, guys, is this big honking muscle that lives right in here, in between what you see here is the lungs and the stomach cavity, okay? The diaphragm is a big muscle that helps us with breathing. It helps us with breath control. It helps keep everything nice and neat and where it's supposed to be, and that we're not mixing our stomach with our lungs and touching and all that good stuff, okay? So that's what we're talking about when we say below the diaphragm. There's two portions of the abdominopelvic cavity. You have the abdominal cavity that contains your digestive organs and spleen, and then you have your pelvic cavity, which contains your urinary and reproductive organs, and then the very last part of the large intestine, which is your rectum, that you excrete or eliminate waste from. There are other cavities we're going to hit as we go through this. You have your nasal cavity, and you guessed it, nasal is the bones and the space behind the nose. The oral cavity or buccal cavity, you're most likely going to see it oral, and that's inside your mouth. Orbital cavity, which has your eyeballs. And then as we move through this, we're going to hit quadrants as well. So a lot of this, guys, is just basic memorization. This will be on your test. So you will have to know your quadrants. We know quad means 4. So abdominal quadrants, there are 4 quadrants, okay? And it's pretty simple: right upper, right lower, and left lower. But think about it, guys, and be really careful when you're using quadrants to describe something, because your person is in anatomical position. If I'm looking at my patient from my screen, these are opposite than what I have, okay? So make sure you take your time. You also need to be familiar with what organs are in each quadrant, okay? There are some organs that hit multiple quadrants. There are some organs that are specific to one, just like our heart would be in our left upper quadrant, okay? So just make sure when you're doing this that you're taking your time and thinking through it. A lot of the questions on this test, guys, are just gonna make for you to take your time, okay? Take your time and answer these questions. Then you have your abdominal regions. This seems to be the part where everybody kind of starts like, oh man, more stuff to memorize, regions of the abdominal area. There are 9 of these, okay? So with quadrants, that's easier to remember because quad means 4, but with the regions, we are gonna have 9 abdominal regions, okay? You do need to memorize these, guys, and you do need to know. My point of advice would be to start here at the umbilical region. We know that the umbilical cord connects at your belly button. So your umbilical region is going to be your belly button. Start here and work your way around, okay? So you know that you're gonna have a right and a left. So you're gonna have your left and your right. And if you can remember one side, okay, if you can remember the right hypochondriac, the right lumbar, and the right iliac, then you can remember the left because it's a complete mirror image. It's just on the left side, okay? Hypochondriac is a term described to someone who has symptoms of sickness all the time. And the hypochondriac regions are where people have pain, and most of the time it could be anxiety related, it could be phantom pain, things like that. So that's why it's called hypochondriac. Lumbar is the portion of the spine that we're referring to. So lumbar on either side is just the spinal portion. And then iliac is a part of your pelvis. So that's why you see this called iliac region. So remember, if you can remember one side, then you've got the other down pat. The only other 2 things that you need to remember are epigastric and hypogastric. Going back to those beautiful medical terms and health team relations, if you had that, and if not, you can learn it now. Epi means above, and hypo means below. So it's easy to remember that epigastric is above the stomach because gastro means stomach, and hypogastric is below the stomach because hypo is below and gastric is stomach. So I know that I've made that seem really simple for you guys, but I promise if you write this down, even if you don't draw the fun, even if you don't draw the fun diagram behind it, but you write down what these regions are, they will make sense to you if you sit down and spend a few minutes studying why they're called what they're called. And that is a smart test taking skill here. So why are they called what they called? Well, it makes sense. So now I'll be able to answer my questions a little bit more efficiently. And that's actually your last slide for today, guys. So we covered abdominal regions, abdominal quadrants, we covered body cavities, we covered terms in relation to the body. So we'll go back to that first slide, directional terms. So we remember we're going to study those in pairs. We covered your planes, 3 of those. Remember, I like the slide on slide 6, the definition and pictures here. We covered your positions such as Fowler's, Trendelenburg, supine, and prone, and then we covered anatomical position. So your assignment for today is to take your notes and be prepared for a quiz tomorrow, Wednesday, January 13th, on these terms, plus what we covered yesterday. Let me know if you have any questions or need me to explain anything to you. Sometimes it's just a different way to explain it and you suddenly understand it. I'm available to you, and let me know what you need. Have a great day.